barbed wire, searchlights cutting the tropical night, thin men in torn uniforms, standing with a fence just to feel a breath of cooler air. The guard shouts something in Japanese, and everyone freezes. But Hina yells at a man. He kicks at a dog. The dog doesn't even growl back. She just lowers her head, ribs showing through her dirty fur, and slips away between the huts, as if знает правила этого ада лучше любого человека. To the guards, she is nothing. A stray, a nuisance, a beast that somehow survived the sinking of a ship months ago. To the prisoners, she is something else entirely. She is the only one here who was never supposed to be alive in the first place. Before this camp, before the beatings, before the hunger, there was a ship, a British gunboat pushing through warm, hostile waters of the Pacific. On that ship, the crew joked they had one extra sailor who never learned to salute. A young, restless dog who slept on the deck, stole food from the galley, and barked at officers as if outranked them all. They called her Judy. Judy didn't care about flags, ranks, or orders. She cared about smells, wind, storms, and people. She was always first to feel when something was wrong. Long before the lookout shouted "smoke on the horizon," Judy would stand up, tail stiff, eyes fixed on a patch of dark ocean. Long before the siren sounded "air raid," she would pace nervously, whine, and scratch at the door to the lower deck. The men laughed, calling her "our four-legged radar," but they also started to pay attention. The night everything changed, the sky looked calm. The sea was black and silent, the stars bright and sharp. Some of the crew were playing cards below deck, others leaned on the rail, smoking and talking about home. Someone tossed Judy a scrap of meat. She caught it in the air, crunched it, and then suddenly froze. Her ears went up, tail stiff, nose raised. No one else noticed it at first. That strange vibration in the distance, that faint hum under the calm surface. The engine's rhythm felt off, a pressure in the air that no machine could measure. Judy began pacing the deck, claws tapping the metal, head snapping from side to side. She ran to the hatch and scratched at it, then back to the rail, then to the nearest sailor. She jumped at his leg, barked sharply once, then twice, eyes wide. "Easy, girl," he muttered, rubbing her head. "Just another night." The night answered with a white flash under the water. The torpedo hit midships with a gut-deep roar. Metal ripped open like paper. Men, cards, cigarettes, everything flew. The calm sea turned into a boiling black wall, swallowing the gunboat in seconds. Lights died, the deck snapped, twisted, vanished, screams mixed with the howl of tearing steel. For one instant, Judy was just a shape outlined against the explosion. Then she was gone, thrown into freezing dark water along with everyone else. Under the surface there was no sky, no ship, no ranks, no orders, only chaos. Bodies thrashed, hands grabbed at nothing, oil burned on the surface, choking lungs. Shards of wood and metal sliced skin. Somewhere, someone prayed. Somewhere else, someone was already silent and sinking. A sailor broke the surface, coughing oil and salt, arms punching at the waves. He saw nothing but fire and blackness. The ship was simply not there. He took one breath, then another, and felt something slam into his chest. Claws, fur, a desperate weight. Judy. She was half drowned herself, eyes burning with panic, front paws clawing at his collar. She bit into the fabric and pulled with all the strength in her small, shaking body, dragging him toward a floating chunk of wreckage. He grabbed the wood because she forced him against it. If she had not crashed into him at that exact moment, he would have gone under. He wasn't the only one. In the flicker of firelight, she was everywhere, a dark shape in a dark ocean. She swam to one man, then another, shoving them toward planks, barrels, anything that floated. She barked hoarsely, the sound cutting through the roar of the flames. A few men later would swear they hadn't seen the wreckage until they heard her. Hours passed like that, not minutes, hours. By the time Japanese ships arrived to rescue survivors, the sea around the ruins of the gunboat was a graveyard, but not as big a graveyard as it could have been. Dozens of men clung to life, fingers white on shattered wood, lungs burning, and somewhere among them, exhausted beyond reason, floated one dog. The Japanese did not come as saviors. They came as captors. Searchlights swept over the water, voices barked orders, rifle butts crashed into hands as men were dragged aboard. Those too weak to stand were kicked until they tried. Some never moved again. The survivors were lined up, shaking, barefoot, still dripping fuel and seawater, staring at the foreign faces that now held their lives. Someone shouted when he saw Judy's head bob near the hull. "Dog! Dog in the water!" For a moment, the nearest Japanese sailor simply stared. A dog in the middle of this carnage, paddling clumsily toward the ship as if it too expected to be pulled aboard. Some of the prisoners shouted, begged, pointed. "Take her, please! She's one of us!" The sailor raised his rifle. The man who had been dragged to the wreckage by her teeth stepped forward without thinking. He had nothing left. No weapon, no helmet, no rank. Just an empty, shaking body and one truth. Without that animal, he would be dead. He spread his arms, stepping between the gun and the dog. "If you shoot her," he rasped in broken Japanese and English, "you may as well shoot me too." For a moment, the only sound was the water slapping the hull. Then someone on the Japanese side laughed, a short, cruel sound. A guard said something to the others, shrugged and waved his hand. The rifle lowered. A rope was thrown, not for the prisoner, for the dog. Judy's claws scraped the metal as she scrambled up, pulled by wet, furious hands. She collapsed on the deck, chest heaving, coughing water, eyes too tired to focus. One of the Japanese kicked her lightly in the ribs as if checking if she was worth the trouble. The verdict was simple. She wasn't dangerous, just an animal. They were wrong. Days later, crammed into the hold of a transport, the prisoners understood their destination, a Japanese prison camp deep in enemy territory. No escape, no help, no hope. And when the doors finally opened and the blinding sun hit their faces, they stumbled out into a world of mud, bamboo towers and barking orders, barbed wire, watchtowers, rows of dying men. At the very end of the line of new arrivals walked a dog, ribs visible, fur still smelling of salt and oil. A guard jabbed her with a bayonet to keep her moving. Someone in the camp looked up, wiped sweat from his eyes, and frowned. "Are they, bringing a dog in here?" The commandant was not amused. A dog meant noise, dirt, stolen food. He wanted her shot. But one of the guards, amused by the way the prisoners looked at her, suggested something else. Let her live. Let her run around. If she caused trouble, they could always kill her later. Besides, the men seemed strangely attached to this creature. That could be useful. So they did something that years later would sound like a dark joke. They wrote her down. They gave her a number. The men got their numbers on paper and wood. The dog got hers scratched onto a piece of metal and wired clumsily to a rope around her neck. In this camp, under a brutal sun, with hunger, disease, and random beatings as daily routine, she became the only prisoner of war with 4 legs. The guards thought they'd just added a stray animal to their collection of broken men. They had no idea they had just allowed a living alarm system, a smuggler, a saboteur, and a future legend to walk straight through the gates. Days in the camp did not pass. They dragged. Morning began with shouting, boots on gravel, and the dull thud of someone being hit for moving too slowly. Men stood in rows, shaking from fever and hunger, while guards counted them like cattle. Names no longer mattered here, only numbers. Except for one prisoner whose number hung crookedly from a piece of wire around her neck. Judy had no idea what a roll call was. She didn't understand flags or orders, barked in a language she'd only learned to fear. But she understood something else better than any officer in any uniform. Danger. When the guards walked lazily, chatting and yawning, Judy lay in the shade, eyes half closed, ears relaxed. When a certain pair of boots appeared at the far end of the yard, the boots of the sadistic corporal who beat men just to hear bone hit dirt, she felt it before anyone saw him. Her ears went up, muscles tensed. She stood stiff as a wire. Within seconds, the prisoners closest to her noticed. They had learned fast. When Judy froze like that, someone was about to scream. She would shift her weight, watching the path between huts. A moment later, the corporal would turn the corner, bamboo stick swinging idly in his hand. By then, the warning had already spread in whispers down the line. "Straighten up, don't cough, don't look at him, he's coming." Judy said nothing. She didn't need to. Her body was the alarm. It started as coincidence. It stopped being coincidence when she did it over and over again. A guard moving toward the water barrels? Judy's head turned before the first shout. A surprise inspection at night, she sat bolt upright in the dark seconds before the hinges squealed on the barracks door. A random raid by dogs against hidden food. She growled low in her chest long before the Japanese dogs were led in on leashes. In a camp where information was as scarce as food, this one animal had more intelligence than half the towers. The man she had dragged from the sea, the one who'd stepped between her and the rifle, watched her closely. His name, before numbers, had been Tom. Back home, he'd been a mechanic. Here, he was prisoner number something meaningless. But Judy remembered his smell, his voice, the way his hands had clung to that plank in the black water. Every time he stumbled under the weight of a sack, she trotted at his side. When he collapsed once, dizziness turning the world into a blur, he felt a wet nose push his cheek, then teeth tugging at his sleeve. Not yet, it felt like she was saying. Get up, keep moving. At first, the guards treated her like a joke. They threw pebbles at her, kicked her if she lay in the wrong place, laughed when she flinched. They thought she would beg for scraps, lick their hands, roll on her back. She didn't. She stayed just out of reach, always closer to the prisoners than to them. When the men worked in the jungle, cutting bamboo or digging trenches, she went with them. The sun burned, the air turned to hot soup in their lungs, and the ground sucked at their feet like wet cement. Men fainted and were kicked awake again. At the edge of the clearing, beyond the line of rifles, the jungle waited, green, dense, filled with sounds they didn't recognize. To the prisoners, that jungle was just another wall. To Judy, it was a map. She slipped into the shadows between the trees, as if the jungle were just another deck on the ship she'd lost. When the guards looked away or focused on beating someone, she vanished. Not far, never far, but just far enough. Her nose worked constantly. Mud, rot, insects, blood, and then, under all of that, water. Not the dirty yellow water in the camp barrels, cool, moving water. She found a small stream hidden by fallen branches and moss, no wider than a man's hand. She drank until her tongue felt alive again. When she came back to the working party, her fur was wet around the muzzle. Tom noticed first. Later, when the guards weren't looking, when darkness had rolled over the camp like a thick tarp, Judy nudged Tom's hand and then padded toward the fence. She looked back at him, eyes burning in the gloom. Follow. Most men were too weak to even think of escape, and the wire, the towers, the guns, all of it said one thing: don't try. But Tom wasn't thinking of escape. He was thinking of thirst. He crawled after her, belly almost scraping the dirt, heart pounding so loud he was sure the guard in the tower could hear it. Judy stopped at a patch of dry, cracked earth behind one of the huts. To anyone else, it was just dead ground. To her, it was a smell. Wet stone, coolness, something that didn't belong to this choking heat. She began to dig. Not the frantic panic digging of a trapped animal. Slow, controlled, paws pushing soil aside in careful strokes. Tom stared, confused, until his fingers brushed dampness. Within minutes, there was a shallow, muddy scoop in the ground and, at the bottom, a dark, glistening sheen. Water. It wasn't much. It wasn't clean. But filtered through cloth, it was better than what the barrels held most days. And it proved something. She could find what they could not. Word spread. Quietly, carefully. Stick close to the dog. She knows where the good water is. She moved before the patrol came. She heard them. She's not just a dog. She's on our side. Slowly, Judy went from being the dog from the ship to our dog. In a place designed to break men, she was the only thing that hadn't been broken. The Japanese noticed the attention she was getting. One guard, bored and mean, tried to test it. During a midday break when the men were too tired to talk, he walked up behind Judy and slammed his boot into her side hard enough to roll her over. Judy didn't whimper. She staggered, shook, and then did something that froze everyone around. She planted herself between the guard and the nearest prisoner, head low, teeth not bared but visible, tail stiff, not tucked. The message was clear, even without words. If you hurt him, you go through me first. The guard laughed and raised his bamboo stick. Men looked away. No one wanted to see what came next. Tom stepped forward again. Leave her, he said quietly. The guard's eyes flicked from the man to the dog and back. For a heartbeat, 3 lives balanced on a single decision. 2 human, 1 animal. Then the guard smirked, spat on the ground, and turned away. He didn't stop because of mercy. He stopped because making men watch their protector get kicked was more useful than killing her. But something shifted in that moment. The prisoners saw it. The guards saw it. Judy, standing there, shaking but unbroken, didn't just warn them anymore. She represented them, their anger, their stubbornness, their refusal to lie down and die. From then on, every time a guard's temper flared, every time a beating started, Judy was there. Not attacking, that would have gotten her shot in an instant, but hovering at the edge, ears flat, ready to jump in. Sometimes she shoved herself between boot and body, taking kicks meant for someone who couldn't stand up anymore. Sometimes her sudden bark startled a guard just long enough for a blow to miss a vital spot. Pain, hunger, disease, nothing in the camp got better. If anything, by the time the monsoon arrived, everything got worse. Floods turned the yard into a swamp. Malarial mosquitoes whined at every ear. Men coughed themselves hoarse in the humid air. But in the darkest weeks, when bodies were carried out every sunrise, something stubborn was still moving between the huts. A dog, covered in mud up to her belly, paws raw from stone and wire, eyes always watching. She warned them when trouble walked. She led them silently to hidden sips of water. She dragged dropped tools toward exhausted hands so men wouldn't be beaten for losing them. She slipped between groups carrying tiny scraps of things no one else noticed. A bit of cloth, a twist of paper, a piece of wire. She didn't know it yet. The guards didn't know it. Even the prisoners didn't fully understand. But the camp had just gained something far more dangerous than any hidden knife. They had a living line between huts, a four-legged radar. And soon, that radar would stop just warning them about danger and start helping them fight back. By the time the rains finally eased, the camp had changed in a way the guards didn't see. The buildings were the same: rotting wood, sagging roofs, rusting wire. The routines were the same: roll call, work, blows for anyone who moved too slow. Men still died in the night and were dragged out in the morning, their numbers crossed off on a board. But under the surface, something invisible had started to move. It walked on four legs. It began with a scrap of cloth. One evening, as the prisoners shuffled back from a work detail, soaked in sweat and mud, Tom sat on the ground outside his hut, picking splinters from his palms. Judy trotted over, shook herself, and dropped something in his lap. A strip of cloth, not much, just a thin, dirty band torn from someone's shirt. At first, he thought she'd found it in the trash. Then he saw the edge. 3 small, hurriedly scratched marks, not letters. Just 3 slanted cuts, burned in with something hot to hide them in the fabric's damage. 3 marks, the same way one of the other work groups used to signal, "I'm still alive," when they passed each other before the guards split everyone up by number. Judy sat down and stared at him. Tom looked up. Across the yard, behind another hut, a familiar face watched him for half a second before turning away to avoid a guard's gaze. The man was supposed to be in isolation. Judy quietly picked up the strip again, trotted away, and disappeared around the corner of the hut. It clicked. She could move where they couldn't, slip through feet under benches, around corners. Guards didn't search a dog. They didn't suspect cloth, or a bit of string, or a small folded leaf pressed into fur. The next day, as they stood in the blistering sun for roll call, Tom tore a tiny piece from the lining of his shorts and pricked his finger on a nail. He drew a shaky symbol with blood, just a crooked line and a dot, a sign only one other man in the camp would recognize. That night, while the guards shouted at each other near the kitchen, Tom knelt, heart hammering, and tied the cloth loosely to Judy's collar under the crude metal tag with her number. He stroked the fur around it and whispered, "Go. Find him." She didn't understand the words. She understood the tone. He let her go. Judy walked into the night as if she were just curious about a smell, past a guard too busy smoking to care, through a gap between 2 huts, around a puddle that stank of old latrine. Her paws didn't make a sound. She stopped once, lifted her head, and sniffed. Men, sickness, rot, all of those smells swirled together, but she picked out the thread she knew, the sweat and soap and smoke of the man Tom wanted, the one she had seen before they split the groups, the one whose hand had once held out food on the ship. She followed it. Minutes crawled by. Tom sat in the dark, every muscle tight. If a guard noticed that cloth, it was over. Not just for him, for Judy, for anyone who had ever scratched a mark into a scrap. Then he heard it. A soft pad of paws behind him. Judy slid back into the shadow of the hut and placed something at his knee. Not cloth this time. A tiny folded triangle of palm leaf, creased and recreased until it was no bigger than his thumb. Inside, written with soot and spit, were just a few words. Still here, working north fence, guards tired. Watch week's end. No speeches, no long letters, just facts. But those facts were more powerful than a full bowl of rice. For the first time in months, Tom knew where his friend was, that he was still alive, and that somewhere near the north fence, guards were slipping. That knowledge passed from bunk to bunk like a current. He's alive. They're on the north side. They say guards are tired near the week's end. Hope stopped being a rumor and became a map. Soon there were more scraps. A warning. New officer, hits first, asks later. A tip. Extra tools hidden pilestones near South Gate. A plea. Medicine? Anything. Fever hut's full. The messages changed everything. Work parties that had once moved like blind ants now shifted with intent. Men swapped places when they could, taking beatings meant for those who were too weak to survive them, because they knew who absolutely had to live long enough to be useful. Tools lost near the South Gate were not lost at all. They were waiting there for the right hands, and every time information moved between huts, it moved on four paws. The guards noticed Judy's constant wandering, of course, but to them it was harmless. A bored animal, sniffing around. Sometimes she'd lie at their feet if prisoners were too far away. Sometimes she'd roll in the mud or chase a fly. One guard tossed her a piece of stale rice and laughed when she ignored it. When punishment parades were ordered, Judy stood in the shadow of the barracks watching. Her eyes tracked boots, sticks, faces. Whenever the guards pulled a man from the line, she fixed her gaze on him and memorized his smell, the way he walked, how he grunted when he was hit. Later, when night swallowed the camp, she would find him, lying behind a hut, curled near a fence, shivering on the floor inside a crowded barrack. She'd push her nose into his neck, checking his breath. If he was still breathing, she'd lie against him, sharing what little warmth she had. Men who woke up from the edge of unconsciousness often felt fur first, heard a steady heartbeat next to their ear. For a few seconds, they forgot where they were. One of them, an older sergeant with broken ribs, whispered into her neck, "You shouldn't be here, girl." But she was. And with every night, every scrap of cloth, every palm leaf triangle, her role grew. Not just a warning, not just comfort, a messenger. It was only a matter of time before someone decided to test how far that could go. The idea came from desperation. A doctor among the prisoners, not really a doctor anymore, just another hollow face with shaking hands, knew by smell and sight that a fever was coming. Dysentery, malaria, all of it blended into one long, wet, coughing nightmare. But now something else spread. Faster, hotter, burning men out in days. He had nothing, no drugs, no bandages, just a few stolen herbs and tricks. Except he had Judy. He tore a thin strip from the inside of his shirt, rolled it tight, and pressed into the center a pinch of crushed dried leaves from a plant growing near the latrine trench, leaves that could maybe ease the worst of the fever. He called Tom. "You know the man at the north fence?" the doctor asked quietly. "The one who can still stand?" Tom nodded. "Get this to him, and get this." He held out two things, the cloth and a plan. They didn't write everything down. Too dangerous. Some of it had to move by mouth, living only as sound and memory. That night, Judy walked again. Cloth tied under her collar, fur pressed flat so nothing showed. She moved in zigzags, never in a straight beeline that would draw attention. Stopped to sniff, paused to scratch, wander as though bored. Guards' eyes slid over her and away. She reached the north fence as a spotlight swung away. A pair of hands reached through the slats, trembling, and found the collar by feel. Easy, girl, easy. A tug, a twist. The strip came free, vanishing into the dark. From that night on, small doses of medicine began appearing where they were needed most, passed hut to hut in fragments. Not enough to cure everyone, not even close, but enough to pull a few men back from the brink. Enough, in a place run by death, to make death just a little slower. Hope grew teeth, and with hope came risk. The more Judy carried, the greater the chance that something would go wrong. All it would take was one guard with a sharper eye, one random search, one moment of boredom turning into suspicion. That moment arrived on a blisteringly hot afternoon. The prisoners were lined up in the yard, sun stabbing down like knives, while the commandant strutted past, inspecting them as if they were rotting meat. Behind him, a younger officer walked with a notebook, writing down numbers, making changes no one in the line would live long enough to understand. Judy lay in the thin strip of shadow beside a hut, panting lightly, seemingly uninterested. But around her neck, under the filthy rope, a small, folded scrap of paper was pressed against her fur. The new officer's eyes flicked across the yard and stopped. On her. He frowned. A dog, in a prison camp, wearing what looked suspiciously like more than just rope. He pointed. The commandant turned his head, followed the gesture, and scowled. "Bring the dog," he snapped. 2 guards moved toward Judy. For the first time since she'd walked through the gates, she didn't trot over when someone called. She stayed low, muscles tight, eyes on Tom at the far end of the line. In that 1 second, he knew. The secret on her collar was about to be ripped into the open, and if they found it, the camp would stop being a place of quiet resistance. It would become exactly what it had always intended to be, a place where hope goes to die. The guards closed in on her. 2 rifles, 1 shouted order. Dust puffed under their boots as they marched across the yard toward the thin strip of shade where Judy lay. Around them, the entire camp seemed to stop breathing. Men stared straight ahead, afraid to look but unable not to listen. Tom's hands curled into fists so tight his nails cut his palms. If they touched that collar and found the folded scrap, it was over. No more messages, no more warnings, no more hidden water. Just beatings, executions, and a dead dog tossed into a ditch. "Dog!" one guard barked, snapping his fingers. Judy didn't wag her tail. She stood up slowly, ribs showing under the dirty fur, head low but eyes clear. For a moment she looked not at the guards but across the yard at Tom. In that look there was no understanding of paper or plans, only recognition. The man from the sea, the one she had dragged to wood and life. Then she walked out of the shade toward the danger. The nearest guard grabbed the rope around her neck and yanked. The metal tag with her number clinked against her throat. He twisted the rope, pulling her up on her back legs like a puppet, inspecting the collar. The new officer stepped closer, eyes narrowed. He wasn't like the others, less bored, more alert, the kind of man who saw patterns where others saw chaos. He reached out, his fingers brushed the rope, and then the rough edge of something else, the folded paper. He frowned and pinched it between thumb and forefinger. On the far side of the yard, Tom moved before his brain had even finished the thought. He broke from the line. It was suicide. Men who stepped out of formation without permission ended up broken on the ground, or worse. But there was no time left for caution. Every second the officer's fingers worked at that paper, their entire secret life shattered a little more. "Sir!" Tom shouted, voice raw. The yard froze harder. The nearest guard swung his rifle around with a curse, sight snapping toward Tom's chest. The commandant's face turned the color of old meat. Men in the line flinched, waiting for the crack of a shot, but the officer with the paper lifted one hand slightly, wordless, and the guard held his fire. "Interesting," his eyes seemed to say. "Very interesting." Tom didn't look at the gun. He looked at the dog. "She steals things," he said, forcing the words out quickly, each one like a stone in his throat. "She takes whatever she finds. It's just trash. She grabs rags, paper, food, anything. Stupid animal." He spat the last 2 words like an insult. His heart hammered so hard, he thought it might be visible through his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him that the officer wasn't buying it, but he had one advantage. The truth wasn't completely a lie. Judy did pick up everything: cloth, string, leaves, bones. She was a magnet for lost things. The only part that could kill them was that this piece wasn't random. The officer studied Tom's face, then the dog, then the scrap. Slowly, he unfolded it. Silence crashed over the yard. A breeze stirred dust around their ankles. A fly buzzed. Somewhere, deep in one of the huts, someone coughed blood into a rag and prayed. The officer looked at the marks inside. There wasn't much, no full sentences, just a few smudged lines in bad Japanese, written with soot and spit, the characters shaky and ugly. Dog useless, eats food, should be shot. It was a message, all right, but not the one Tom had expected. The officer's eyebrows twitched just once. He stared at the paper for a long moment, then at the dog, then at the guard who had been kicking her earlier that week. Something like amusement flickered in his eyes, cold and sharp. He turned the paper around and held it out. "Who wrote this?" he asked, voice flat. No one answered. The guard who'd kicked Judy shrugged, snorted, and muttered something about stupid British jokes. The commandant scowled, annoyed that his inspection had turned into a circus over a dog. Finally, with a disgusted flick of his hand, the officer crumpled the scrap and tossed it into the dirt. "Then shoot her later," he said. "If she causes trouble." He let go of the collar. The rope snapped back. Judy dropped onto all fours, legs trembling. For a second, she just stood there, stunned. Then she did the most dangerous thing she could have done. She walked away from the officer, not fast, not running, just calmly, directly, back toward the line of prisoners, past the rifles, past the sticks, past the men who didn't dare breathe. She slid in beside Tom's legs and pressed against his shins, as if the last few minutes had been nothing more than an annoyance. Her ribs rose and fell under his hand. He didn't look down, but his fingers brushed her head once, a tiny, forbidden thank you. The guards shouted, shoved, kicked the line back into order. The inspection resumed. Names were never called, only numbers. The day went on, but the camp had changed again. In the dark that night, as men lay on rough boards, listening to the drip of water and the distant coughs of those who wouldn't see morning, the whispers moved. She walked away. They didn't shoot her. She stared right at him and walked away. It wasn't magic. It wasn't a miracle. It was something harder and more dangerous than that, the realization that the dog wasn't easy to kill anymore. She was known, not just by the prisoners, but by the officers, by the commandant, by the man with the notebook. Somewhere in a ledger she existed now, not as a scrap of rope, but as a living thing officially counted and for the moment protected. The guards had almost broken her. Instead, without meaning to, they'd made her untouchable. Days turned into weeks. The war beyond the fence shifted and groaned, but in here, life still measured itself in watery rice, beatings, and the shuffle of bare feet on packed earth. Yet quietly, in the shadow of the huts, Judy's role evolved. With the collar incident, the prisoners grew smarter. They stopped using paper. No more folded scraps. No more ink. Everything that moved on her neck from then on was invisible. A knot in the rope to mean north, a twist to mean south, a tiny shell caught in the fibers to signal tonight. She became not just a messenger, but a code. When she lay near the latrine with her rope twisted 3 times, those who understood knew. Someone there needed help. When she scratched 3 times at the door of the fever hut, it meant the doctor had to come, no matter the risk. And when she suddenly vanished for hours into the jungle and returned with her fur matted and her paws bleeding, the men knew she was doing what no one else could, hunting for food, sniffing out hidden roots, catching rats and snakes that she dropped proudly at Tom's feet. He shared every scrap she brought, half for him, half for someone worse off. Judy never argued. She only watched, learning in her own way who was weakest, who was fading, who needed to feel her head on their chest in the darkness. Sometimes, late at night, Tom would sit with his back against the wall, Judy's head in his lap, and tell her about a world she had never really known. Grass that wasn't trampled into mud, rivers that weren't poison, houses where doors closed for warmth, not fear, beds, fields, a sky without watchtowers. "I don't know if I'll ever see it again," he would whisper, fingers tangled in her fur. "But if I do, you're coming with me, girl. We started drowning together. We don't finish this apart." She would sigh and close her eyes, not understanding the words, but understanding the promise. Outside, under the moonlight, the wire glinted. On the other side of that wire lay jungle, war, and a world that had forgotten the names of the men trapped here. But inside the fence, in the cruelest corner of that world, there was one fact no guard, no commandant, no officer with a neat notebook could erase. They had turned a ship's mascot into a prisoner. They had tried to starve her, kick her, break her. And instead, they had created something else. A symbol with teeth, a rumor with a heartbeat, a dog they could not break. Years later, when the war was over and medals were handed out to men with uniforms and scars, someone would read a citation aloud that spoke of magnificent courage and endurance in Japanese prison camps and saving many lives through intelligence and watchfulness. But in the camp itself, long before those words existed, the truth was simpler. When everything else was designed to crush them, one animal refused to bend. And because she refused, dozens of men learned how to stand.